Welcome to It's Art, Let's Talk About It, a podcast sponsored by the Museum of Western Art in Kerrville, Texas. Located in the heart of the Texas Hill Country, the museum is dedicated to the preservation and promotion of the American West, especially through the art of the West. In this podcast series, we will visit with artists, art collectors, and gallery directors working in the Western art genre. We'll talk about the history and heritage of Western art, and we'll talk about why talking about Western art is so important. I'm Darrell, the Executive Director of the museum, and I'll be your host for It's Art, Let's Talk About It. The podcast is a member of the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network.
In this episode, Darrell visits with Holden, a sculptor who is in the Cowboy Artists of America. Harold has unfortunately passed away, so the episode starts with a tribute to Harold Holden from his good friends Darrell Beauchamp and Jason Scull. I know you'll enjoy this episode of It's Art, Let's Talk About It. If you haven't done so, please visit the Museum of Western Art in Kerrville, Texas. We'd love to see you there.
Hi, this is Darrell Beauchamp, Executive Director of the Museum of Western Art. And for this episode of It's Art, Let's Talk About It, we're going to be visiting with Harold H. Holden, an Oklahoma sculptor noted for his monumental works and his general love of the horse. This interview was recorded in April of 2023 when Kerrville artist Jason Scull and I traveled to Holden's hometown of Enid, Oklahoma, to capture his handprint, boot print, and signature in concrete for addition to the museum's Cowboy Artist of America sculpture garden. At that time, H, as he was known to his friends, was in somewhat declining health, and since he couldn't come to the museum for the ceremony, we decided to take the ceremony to him. I last saw H at the Fall Cowboy Artist of America sale in November, and he passed away on December 6th of 2023. I'm joined for this introduction by my good friend Jason Scull, who made that trip with me to Enid, Oklahoma. And Jason, I sure am glad we did.
Yes, I am too, Darrell.
Well, that was a fascinating trip, you know.
Well, we got to see a lot of country and learned a lot about our friend H.
And the reason we went up there, in addition to gathering his concrete handprint and signature for addition to the garden, because we figured he would never make it down here to Kerrville, was to borrow a work of art for the 40th anniversary show.
That's right.
And so we had a chance to do that. You first introduced me to H a number of years back. Let's talk about your friendship with him.
Well, you know, I met H and his wife Edna May in the mid-'90s through the Working Ranch Cowboy Association World Championship Ranch Rodeo. They had started that event and included an art show with it, and H was one of the artists that was brought in for that. And so that began a 30-year friendship that I had with H and Edna May. And you know, to think about someone that had a career in Western art that spanned 50 years or five decades, you know, it's just pretty amazing to think, because he was there at the more or less the onset of the resurgence of Western art and its appreciation by those who became collectors.
Yeah, and he was one of those great monumental sculptors, one of those guys who did the big pieces in a lot of ways. And
he did, I think, 24, 25 monuments in his life.
Just fascinating. And, of course, we visited with him and Edna May at their home in Kremlin, Oklahoma, north of Enid.
On H. Holden Road.
On H. Holden Road, And at that time, we weren't doing the It's Art, Let's Talk About It. We had just started thinking about it, and he was one of the very first interviews that I did. I had to do it on my cell phone, of all places. And the technology being as such it is, our producer Tom Fox and the good folks at Hill Country Podcast Network, Texas Hill Country Podcast Network, were able to transfer it from my cell phone to technology good enough for the podcast. And
that's awesome.
But that was an interesting thing to do, talk about H, because I knew he was in poor health. Did not know exactly how poor.
Yeah.
But what a loss to both the sculpting community, the artist community, and just an all-around great guy.
Yeah, and the ranching communities too, because H crossed over into so many different realms because of that. And his love of cowboys his love of ranching, and as you pointed out earlier, his love of horses.
And it was, it was interesting because I knew he was missing from the garden. He had been brought into the Cowboy Artist of America in 2013, 12, somewhere in there, that range, 13. Yeah. And he had
actually 2012. You're right.
He had just never made the trip to Kerrville to have his handprint.
Yeah.
And that's about the time we had stopped doing them for a while, And when I got here in 2019, we reinstated that and started trying to fill in the gaps. And it was you suggested that we can kill two birds with one stone. We can go up there and get the handprint made, borrow the work of art. And I was fortunate enough to say we had a few minutes there while the concrete was setting up to say, H, would you do a little interview with me? And he was kind of reluctant to do it, but it was funny.
Glad you did it.
Yeah, he will be missed. And Harold passed away December 6, 2023. So this interview is him, a posthumous look at his life, a discussion, and we're really happy to bring it to you on It's Art. Let's talk about it. So let's listen now to our interview with Harold H. Holden in an interview recorded in April 2023 on It's Art. Let's talk about it. Now we're joined by my special guest, a good friend of ours, Harold T. Holden, or H as many of his friends call him, world-class sculptor, member of the Cowboy Artist of America, and a good friend of the Museum of Western Art. And H, we're glad to have you on the show today. Thanks for joining me.
I appreciate being here.
Tell me a little bit about your career, how long you've been doing this, and what gave you the start, because no one's born necessarily saying at 3 years old, I want to be an artist, but something inspired you to become a sculptor. What was that?
My dad raised horses, put me on a horse when I was a kid, and he got killed in his airplane when I was young. Anyway, that inspired me in the horse end, and I've had horses all my life. Like to rope, or used to. And between that and subject matter was what I liked. And so everything I did was either cowboys or some Indian work. And I did my first sculpture, I think, in 1974. There was a little foundry over at the time. But I was really a painter for the early part of my life. I was painted, drew and painted. And then I took up sculpting and got into monuments, and it's taken a lot of time from doing what you want to do. The small ones are fine, the maquettes, but then you got to do the big ones. And so everything that you want to have for shows and limit you sometimes. But when you're young, you can get this stuff done.
You've had an amazing career, and like you said, you mentioned the monuments, and if I recall, there's 6 or so in the city of Enid, Oklahoma, near your home, and they're absolutely wonderful. Tell us a little bit about those 6 in Enid.
The first monument I ever did, I did in 93, no, it was 86. It was a guy making the run of 93, and they ended up making a stamp on it. I did the stamp for 93, and it was a big action piece. It was just life-size, but it was all action. Legs are off the ground. Then one led to another, and I think this one I got in here is going to be 25. But when I started out, you had to do it the old way, the point-up system. It's a little different now. But my subject matter has always been my main drive to...
And that'd be the horse.
Yeah, the horse. I did a big sculpture of a horse called World Champion down at Oklahoma City Fairgrounds. And it's supposed to be the perfect horse, quarter horse. But yeah, horses, I love horses, and I've always had horses. My dad, of course, I told you, was a horseman, and so it's really been just between being horseback and painting and sculpting. That's all I've done in the past.
Kind of have to do the math in your head.
Yeah.
How many sculptures do you think you've done in your career? Any idea?
No,
Just a bunch.
bunch. Yeah.
Just a bunch. And you've got collectors all around the world, I know, because I know several of them, and they all speak so highly about the honor of owning a Harold Holden bronze, and they love them. Everybody who's ever been a part of them.
I'm glad. I've never been satisfied with anything, but most artists aren't.
Let's talk about for a second the Cowboy Artist of America and your first forays into that, trying to attempts to get in. You were turned down a number of times, and then at some point you were brought into the CA and have had a lengthy career in it now.
Yeah, I was asked to come down to Phoenix twice, and I decided I wasn't going to go again. It was just one of those things. But later on, at one of the shows, it might have been the Free to West show, I'm not sure, but Fred Fellows came up to me and asked me if I would consider being in the CA, and I said, yeah, I'm just not interested in doing a lot of pleas. So he said, no, I think you've got the best going right now, and so he's the one that recommended me to it. And
you've been a member of the CA since when?
2012.
2012. Right. But that's after a long and lengthy career. So you've been a sculptor for a number of years prior to that.
74. Painting, I think, until I still paint, but it's just not as much going out. I started doing a calendar for Vernon Company out of up north, and what they do, they have your paintings on calendars, and people put their business names down there. That's how they sell them. So I was the only one that did Cowboy work for them.
There you go.
And it lasted a while, and they give me free calendars with my name on it. I started sending those out, and then when they finally decided to go back to farm scene, my wife said, we got to keep doing that because people expect those things. And she thought it was the best advertisement. Like when you give them a calendar or something, they hang it on the wall and then they remember your name. So she's been in charge of that for quite a while.
And we're talking about the famous Edna May.
Yes.
Of course. Everybody knows Ed Mays who ever had to deal with and want an H sculptor or painting. Yeah. Let's talk about that together. You guys have been together a number of years, and she's the backbone of this operation, don't you think?
She is. She saved my life a couple of times. Yeah. And she's from a ranching family, a lawyer, but she likes to do everything horseback. So when I used to rope together, team rope, but I like to go over to Osage to drag calves, rope and drag calves. And I got away from home, and she decided she wanted to start doing that. She ended up coming dragging calves. And then we ended up going to the Pitchfork every spring. Bob Morehouse was a friend of ours, and she got to ride a world champion ranch horse. So she thought she was pretty special, all right.
And she is very special. Talking about special people, you mentioned Fred Fellows, others. Who are the artists from your past that stand out as being special artists that everybody, if they're interested in the Western art world, who should they be looking at?
There's so many, but Tom Ryan was one of my favorite painters of the Cowboys, the modern cowboy that I know. I do some Old West things, but most of my subject matter has been of today or a few years ago.
One of the works that we've come to Enid, Kremlin, Oklahoma to borrow from you is a work called Rescue Team. Rescue Party. Talk about that one for a little while, because it's going to be in the 40 Years of Western Art exhibition at the Museum of Western Art, and we wanted a piece that represented your body of work, and I think we found one.
It's different. It's really one had 4 pieces in the first Prix de West show in '95, and I had a great big piece of Brandon seeing him drag a cow after a horse and rider and a calf, and that piece was in that show, and I sold quite a few, and I thought there's no way we're driving down. This first year I was in that because the cattle market was down, the wheat was down around here, oil was down. I said, oh no. But I sold out.
When you seek out subject matters, or do you use friends in your painting, family, or in your sculptures? Whose likenesses do you use? You have friends, family, all of the above?
All of the above. I got to know lots of cowboys, of course.
Right.
And I did a sculpture of Bob Morehouse on his horse. It's in the museum down there.
Right.
But there's some cowboys around these parts. They're not the big ranch cowboys, but
Right.
there's some good cowboys. And I've been to some big ranches, and like the Pitchfork, King Sabi, I went on there once, and you learn what they do. So I get a lot of material while I'm out there, besides getting to do whatever the cowboys get to do.
Let's talk about your studio for just a minute. We're sitting in the middle of your studio outside of north of Enid, and it's full of history, memorabilia. You've got photographs, book covers, our magazine covers. It's just a time capsule of a lot of life well lived. Talk about that. This is your kind of go-to place when you're trying to be creative?
Yes, it is, and the photographs, and I like to look at good gear. I've got lots of good saddles and just bits and spurs, and I'm fascinated with those. I've traded with some of the best spur makers and saddle makers, traded art, and a couple of the spur makers, old Jerry Cates, he's in the Cowboy Hall now, and Bob Mars, who made a couple saddles for me, who just died not too long ago, but he was pretty well known in the cowboy world in Texas, and sometimes the sculptures change, but stuff on the wall usually doesn't.
Yeah. Let's talk about the big sculpture, the monumental that you're working on right now. What's it all about?
It's of a guy named Frank Eaton, and it's one I'd always wanted to do for OSU, Oklahoma State University. That's their old mascot, but it's not the big head. It's the real guy, and he used to come to Enid when I was a kid. I had this little, he was a pony horse. He's a pretty good horse, though, or pony, I'd call him. And I was 6 years old, and I rode in the parade. There was tons of people back then that rode in the Cherokee Strip parade, and I'd rear this pony up in front of the judges. And so one of the prizes was, I still got it up in the studio upstairs, of $5 I won, first prize. And one of the deals you got to sit on old Frank Eaton's lap, pistol piece lap, and hold his gun. When I was 6 years old, pretty big impression. His son, Frank Eaton, was our milkman from Enid when we lived in the country south of here ways. But he brought our milk. And so we become good friends with him. And the story was, when old Frank came to town, there was a cowboy, Les Williams, old cowboy, they'd get in this station wagon together. And they were drunk, tipping the bottle, and they'd ride around that, raising hell. And so I had a friend of mine that had a station wagon. Is that what they call them? Not a station wagon, what do you call them? Stage.
A stagecoach? Stagecoach?
God.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm lost in the. Anyway, I got him to come down and during the parade one year, and I had Frank get in it and ride around in the parade, just like his dad. So this is the last piece I'm going to do big, and it's the one I wanted to do for years. I've done some that are not Western. I just did Barry Sanders and Boone, and this one's going to go over there someplace. And I got one other one over there. It's called the We Will Remember. It's a life-size cowboy leaning down on the ground with his hat off, and I did it for the players that were killed from OSU from when they were flying back from Colorado, and I had the inspiration to do that because I lost my first grandson, and when I lost him, I fell to my knees and left in pain. That's what I put into that piece, and they could tell the families. They could tell.
Be it works that celebrate life or depict tragedy, you can look at you as you're talking about these works and see the joy in your face and your eyes. You've enjoyed doing this, haven't you?
Oh, yeah, sure. I love to do it.
And we're going to hope we just keep on doing it for a very long time.
Until I'm not around.
We appreciate you joining us today on the show and on this podcast. It's art. Let's talk about it. It's always fun to spend time with artists and hear their thoughts on things, and we appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, boss.
No, it was our pleasure, and that was our special guest, Harold T. Holden, H, as everybody's called, and we appreciate him coming on the show today. Thanks so much.
I'm almost a ghost.
They talk about live radio. This is exactly what we're talking about, is you just have to flow with it. Our special guest, H, Harold T. Holden. We appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
I know you can cut and make me sound good.
We always talk about radio being a network for people like you and me. I have a face made for radio, right? So we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Tom Fox again. Unbeknownst to either Darrell or Harold, the mic was still on after they concluded the podcast, so we have a short bonus segment with Harold Holden.
Anyway, I started talking, and I got carried away.
After a little Crown Royal.
I did. They said, you got 3 minutes. 15 minutes later, I was...
There you go.
I
promised you this would be, 10 minutes or so. We went 20, so.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It kind of flies when you're having fun telling stories about what you love to do. Oh.
Yeah, that was good. I appreciate it.
Yeah. One of the reasons we're here, today, in addition to picking up the work that you're lending us, is that we're going to do the boot print and hand print little ceremony here in just a few minutes when the concrete sets up, because we feel like it's important to, have you in the garden, if you will, back there of the back of the Museum of Western Art. And, we're real glad we were able to come up and do this.
Well, that's my honor to do it.
Yeah. We'll post pictures of that to our website and social media, and it's a lot of fun to, I don't want to say memorialize or induct, put somebody in the garden, and they'll be there forever and ever. So, it's fun when we could add somebody whose boot print, footprint, signature, and all that has gone missing all those years because, just timing. We were never able to do it at the museum. So, since we were going to be up here, Jason Scull and I thought we'd just come up and make this happen.
Well, you did.
We did. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of It's Art, Let's Talk About It, a production of the Museum of Western Art in Kerrville, Texas. We hope you'll visit the museum in person. We're located at 1550 Bandera Highway in Kerrville, Texas. Find out more about us by going to www.museumofwesternart.com. And we hope you'll join us next time for It's Art, Let's Talk About It. The podcast is produced by the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network.